not siloing anymore.
That's not siloing, right? It may be a different problem, but it's not siloing. The other thing that happens a lot is, now Wikipedia is the 5th most popular website in the world. Almost any topic that would be of any interest to anyone, politically or otherwise, you go to Google and you say, oh, I'm very curious about, I heard this Nick Clegg guy is creating a stir in England. Who is he? I've never really heard of him before. You type it in, and there you're going to get the Wikipedia entry, which is basically very neutral and just trying to lay out who he is and so on and so forth.
Jimmy, you really believe it's neutral? You ever check my entry on Wikipedia?
Well, this is an important point, but not so much your entry. But what is your entry? What is wrong?
Well, my entry is a funny one, and it shows, I think, the problem with this media. I was on the Colbert Show, and Colbert is a comedy show. We take it seriously, but it's comedy. And at one point, Colbert, and I was trying to be as serious as I possibly could, but and everyone warned me on Colbert, the one thing you mustn't do is make a joke. And I, of course, didn't listen to that. So at one point, Colbert turned to me and he said, because I had written this book saying how the internet's killing our culture, which of course he loved. And Colbert said, so Mr. Keane, is the internet worse than the Nazis? And we brought up the Nazi, there's this law on the internet, I think, what's it called?
Godwin's law.
Yeah, after 30-second debate, the Nazis usually come out, which I've, of course, done here. But anyway, so he made some remark about the Nazis, and I thought I'd make a joke, since I'm supposed to be so clever. So I said, oh, Mr. Colbert, Stephen, the internet is worse than the Nazis. Now, I was joking. I'm Jewish. In a previous life, I studied Germany very seriously. I'm under no illusion. Even Wikipedia is better than the Nazis. But now when you go to my Wikipedia page, it says, Andrew Keane says that the internet is worse than the Nazis. Now, why does it say that? It says it because there's no editor, because there's no central control, because a lot of people don't like me. I'm supposed to be the Antichrist of Silicon Valley, blah, blah, blah. But what Wikipedia is lacking...
That's what it says on your Twitter handle, actually.
I'm not
joking. It does.
I'm AJ Keane, by the way, on Twitter. But what Jimmy's, and I use it all the time, but what Jimmy's excellent website lacks is a curatorial class. People who are able to say, well, yeah, he did say that, but that was a joke show, so it shouldn't go in his bio.
And of course, this is now not silos. This is expertise. I had a similar experience, not quite so pointed, with a newspaper that I used to be the editor of in the early 70s, and it's up there on Wikipedia, which I use all the time. But up on Wikipedia is this newspaper's story, as told by one minor figure in the newspaper, making it sound as if it were his. And no one has sort of had the, I don't know, the wherewithal, audacity, chutzpah, whatever the word is, to say, hey, wait a second, and rewrite it. Mm-hmm. So plenty of stuff up there is partisan, yes?
I wouldn't say partisan, maybe in Andrew's case, but I think tomorrow when you go there, it'll say that he has grudgingly conceded that Wikipedia is not quite as bad as the Nazis. But we make progress. It's called dialogue. No, but it is true that, of course, Wikipedia is always a work in progress. One of the things that we normally do that's quite good is we warn you. We'll say the neutrality of this entry has been disputed, which even Colbert has had fun with that line because it's so famous now from people seeing it in Wikipedia. But I think it's important to recognize that perfection is not a valid standard for anything. We know that there are errors in newspapers every day. We know that there's biased reporting and everything. And we can accept that this is part of the human condition. What we need to do is think about what are the mechanisms to reduce or minimize this. And so within Wikipedia, we do have a curatorial class. We have the administrators who are quite thoughtful.
But you don't pay them, right?
No. They're all passionate volunteers who are really excited about sharing knowledge and working for quality and so forth.
But passion doesn't pay mortgages.
No, it doesn't pay mortgages, that's right. Which means that if you have a job as the author of an encyclopedia, you may have an economic problem today, simply because there are people who are very passionate and very good at it who are willing to do it as a hobby, which is certainly a very interesting change in the world that we all have to think about.
Democracy, mob rule. Do you agree with him about this?
Can I just ask? Can I just make a point about silos, though?
You can actually say anything you want.
Right. So you're right. So this Chicago study is one study that suggested that perhaps people aren't siloing themselves. There have been others that suggested that maybe maybe people who read blogs are siloing themselves. There was a study about 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, that suggested that blogs on the right were linking mainly to other right-wing blogs. Left-wing blogs were linking mainly to other left-wing blogs. And I think that the other thing that we should remember about silos is that even if it's true that even if people aren't siloing themselves online, what we're seeing more and more is that the extreme points of views that we're getting from that couldn't have been introduced into national discussion in the past are being introduced now by this sort of entry mechanism. That people put it on blogs, and then it gets picked up by cable news, and then it becomes a national discussion by virtue of the fact that it was...
So what? How does that threaten democracy? I mean, you can say that it's messier, but what I still have not heard is why this is such a terrible thing and why the internet is this great threat. Remember, that's the proposition that you're here to defend, that democracy is threatened by the unchecked nature of information on the internet. So defend it.
Well, I think you do have to make the point, Mika, that the core question here is whether the internet, and of course when one speaks of the internet, one is talking simultaneously of highly curated media like the New York Times and Wikipedia, which has very little curation. So it's a little tricky. But the core question in my mind about democracy is whether the internet culture, if you like, this highly democratized media where everyone becomes an author, where we do away with the old structures of power, where we undermine 20th century meritocracy, and we replace it with this 21st century, what I would call perhaps mob rule, what you would call democracy, whether that but let me just finish, whether that would actually lend itself to the production of a better informed citizenry.
Well, we don't know. Actually, on that point, I would say that greater access to information could be part of what will get us a better informed citizenry. But what I'm concerned about here is what gets us a better democracy. And what I fear much more is that control on information is what entrenches power, and that freedom of information is how we check power. The problem that the internet is helping solve is that it is now easier to raise questions into the public debate that need to be raised, that information that otherwise might be suppressed is harder to suppress. And that is a fundamental good thing for democracy, that greater transparency, that more timely availability of information. I can look up what you said, and the video will be there on YouTube, and I can then put it to you. Well, you said it here, and now you're saying the opposite. That this is vital for accountability of power. And whether every single citizen is going to be better informed is almost a secondary question.
Is there no issue here of civility, however? Jerry Belisle started out by talking about the civility that something like this forum represents. Mm-hmm. My own experience with the internet, which is not inconsiderable, and that of a friend of mine, a Yale professor who just posted something on the Financial Times, wrote something in the Financial Times, and was literally appalled by what came back at him.
Yeah.
There's this attack mode, is there not? There's this letting go of your aggression because you don't have to use your name and you don't see the other person. It's kind of like the toxic assets you can sell because you're selling it to somebody, you're not, the buyer doesn't know the seller. No? Am I crazy?
I think this is correct. I think there is a problem of civility, and I think it is very important. Just to give an example, I recently wrote an editorial, co-authored an editorial about civility on the internet. It was published in the Wall Street Journal, there on the website. It took about 4 or 5 comments before the commenters were screaming at each other about Obama and Bush, which had, by the way, nothing to do with what I wrote.
Mm-hmm. Yes, my point exactly, yes.
What I think that we need to recognize is that we have to work for social mechanisms that drive towards quality and thoughtfulness, and that we are still very much at the beginnings of that. We have some hints of it here and there. We have Wikipedia, which is, of course, human beings do argue, but it's mostly a fairly civil environment, and we have rules like no personal attacks, and you can get blocked pretty quickly for yelling at people or calling them Nazis. But we have other places on the internet, particularly newspapers, haven't really figured out how to engage their audiences in a way that's productive. And instead what we have